The glass felt cool against my knuckles as I leaned into the conference room window, watching the city breathe beneath me. San Francisco stretched out in grids of gold and gray, the bay glinting in the early light. Behind me, the muted voices of Verity Tech's executive team buzzed like background static. No one interrupted me. They'd seen the headline. Verity Tech acquires Langston Capital in historic fintech takeover. The words were simple, clean, almost sterile on the screen, but I could still feel the pulse behind them. This wasn't just a business deal, not for me. Langston Capital, my family's empire, was now under our roof. The same company where I'd once been told I had no place. The same one that poured millions into grooming my brother while giving me silence and expectation. I hadn't gone after them out of spite. I hadn't needed revenge. I needed space to build. And when no one gave it to me, I made it for myself. The room behind me erupted in light applause. Some of the execs were celebrating the win with quiet clinks of coffee cups. I didn't join them. I wasn't here for the congratulations. I turned away from the window, straightened my tie, and stepped back into the room. William Harper, our CEO, nodded at me from the head of the table. "You okay, Everett?" he asked, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. I gave a small smile. "Yeah, just remembering." Because long before this office, this title, this view, there was a dinner table in Charleston, South Carolina, where the words, "I'll never forget," were spoken. Words that didn't just push me away, they pushed me forward. We grew up in a white-columned house on Rutledge Avenue, a place where silence floated as thick as the summer humidity. The shutters were always painted fresh, the lawn always trimmed, the parties always perfect. People admired the Langstons, the philanthropic couple behind Langston Capital, with their two sons, one destined for greatness, the other reliable. Camden and I were born 5 minutes apart. He was the kind of child who walked into a room and made it feel like a stage. I was the one adjusting the spotlight from the wings. He had an easy laugh, straight teeth, a way of making people feel like they mattered, at least for a few minutes. I didn't resent him for that. Not at first. He just knew how to play the part, and I didn't even know there was a script. From a young age, Camden was the one guests asked about. "He's going to be a senator one day," someone once said at a garden brunch. I was pouring lemonade into a crystal pitcher when I heard it. No one noticed me spill a little. When we were 14, I won a national math competition, placed first in the country. I thought maybe that would mean something. I printed the certificate myself and handed it to our mother while she was on the phone. She smiled politely, put it on the kitchen counter, and never picked it up again. That same week, Camden hosted a youth charity gala at the local yacht club. He wore a navy blazer, spoke for 4 minutes about hunger in Charleston, and posed for pictures with a check our parents had written in his name. The next day, there were photos in the paper. Dad raised a toast at dinner. Camden leads. "Everett calculates," he said, as if that explained everything. Everyone laughed. Even Camden, though he glanced at me for a second too long. After that, I stopped expecting recognition. Instead, I started writing things down, ideas, questions, bits of conversations. I kept the notebook under my mattress, the pages full of scribbles no one would ever read. It didn't make the distance smaller, but it made it bearable. And when summer came, I packed the notebook and boarded a bus heading north away from the mansions and manicured perfection toward the only person who ever looked at me like I wasn't invisible. Great-Aunt Selma's house sat at the end of a gravel road in rural Virginia, tucked between sloping hills and stubborn vines that clawed at the fences like they were trying to escape. The first time I visited, I thought the place looked tired. The shutters were peeling, the porch sagged, and the yard was dotted with rusting tools. But Selma wasn't tired. She was sharp as a blade and twice as quick. She'd been a stock analyst back when few women sat at those tables, let alone spoke. Retired now, she spent her days tending grapes, reading company filings for fun, and writing in the margins of financial newspapers with a red pen. She welcomed me with black coffee, a firm handshake, and no small talk. I liked her immediately. In Charleston, I always felt like I was performing. At Selma's, there was nothing to perform. I didn't have to impress her, just keep up. She'd hand me articles and ask what I thought about interest rate signals or balance sheet red flags. When I stumbled, she didn't scold, she waited. "Real value isn't given," she told me one evening as we watched the sky turn lavender behind the hills. "It's proven quietly over time." That summer, I began building a basic stock market simulator on her old desktop. It was crude and slow, but I fed it hours of data, teaching it to mimic market trends. I stayed up late adjusting variables, not because anyone asked me to, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how to make it better. I showed Selma my first prototype just before I left for Charleston again. She didn't shower me with praise. She sat down, clicked through the model, nodded once, then handed me a dog-eared copy of The Intelligent Investor. "Now let's teach it something useful," she said. No photo was taken, no party was thrown. But I carried that moment with me like a flame cupped between my palms. It didn't light up the room, but it warmed me when I needed it. And I needed it most on the night I realized that my parents' definition of love came with conditions and a ledger. The Stanford acceptance email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat alone in the upstairs study, staring at the screen as my name appeared above the words, "Congratulations, you've been admitted to the class of 20XX. For a second, I didn't move. I just let it sink in, every sleepless night, every late bus ride to tutoring, every quiet hour I spent building simulations or studying Selma's notes. It had all led to this. I didn't run downstairs. I didn't shout. I just forwarded the email to Selma with a single line. We did it. Camden got in too. He was louder about it, jumping on the phone with friends, posting a picture of the Stanford crest on social media, tagging our parents with heart emojis and champagne bottles. His GPA was lower than mine, his application essay had been edited by a private consultant, and he didn't win any academic awards. But he had charm. That was always enough. Saturday night, our parents called for a special dinner. The dining room table was dressed in its finest silver cutlery wine glasses, catching the chandelier light, everything just a bit too staged. I knew something was coming. What I didn't expect was how cleanly they'd divide the room. "We're proud of both of you," my father began, raising his glass. "Camden, you've worked hard. Your mother and I want to fully support your time at Stanford. Tuition, housing, living expenses, it's all taken care of. We've even found a condo near campus." Camden smiled too quickly. "Thank you. I won't let you down." My father then turned to me. "Everett, you're practical. Always have been. You'll figure it out. It'll build character." His tone was almost congratulatory, as if denying me support was a prize of its own. My mother nodded, not unkindly. "You're independent. You always have been. This is your chance to prove it." I looked across the table at Camden. His eyes met mine for a second. He knew. He knew it wasn't right. But he didn't say a word. I nodded. "Understood," I said, voice flat. I even raised my glass. That seemed to satisfy them. Later that night, I locked my bedroom door, sat at my desk, and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there hollow and stunned. Then I opened my laptop and began searching. Scholarships, grants, part-time jobs, low-interest student loans, anything that might get me to the same place on my own terms. I made a list. I taped it above my bed. I titled it, Build Character. And in the weeks that followed, I learned exactly how many doors you have to knock on when the ones you were born into won't open for you. My first apartment in Palo Alto was smaller than our dining room back home. I shared it with 3 other students, none of whom had much time to talk, and the kitchen smelled perpetually of burnt rice and instant noodles. My mattress sat directly on the floor, the closet door didn't close properly, and the bathroom sink leaked just enough to keep me awake most nights. I worked nearly 30 hours a week at a small fintech startup 10 miles from campus data entry, at first, then slowly analysis work, as they realized I knew more than I let on. The hourly wage covered just enough groceries, bus fare, second-hand textbooks, and the occasional cup of burnt coffee during finals. Each morning I caught the 6:45 bus and stood the entire ride pressed between tired commuters. Most days I arrived to class with damp hair and a sweat-soaked collar, my stomach hollow, my mind already calculating hours left in the day. I didn't blend in. I didn't try. Then came Liana Prescott. It was the second week of microeconomics, and I'd shown up late again, slipping into the last seat just as the professor began. I dropped my pen. She picked it up. "You look like you ran a marathon," she whispered. I shrugged, embarrassed. "Part-time job. Missed the early bus." She nodded without judgment, then passed me a printed copy of the syllabus. They handed these out Monday. You were probably working then, too. That was Liana, observant kind and entirely unpretentious. She studied like she had something to prove, but laughed like nothing in the world could break her. We started working together, sitting side by side in the library, splitting meals, sometimes just sitting in silence when words felt heavy. With her, I didn't feel like the tired kid from Charleston clawing for relevance. I felt seen. Camden arrived at Stanford a week later, stepping out of a sleek Porsche our parents had shipped in from South Carolina. Within days, he was hosting dorm mixers and talking about his plans to disrupt finance, though he hadn't opened a textbook yet. His name carried weight. His smile carried him further. I watched from the sidelines the way I always had. Except this time I wasn't standing still. I was moving slowly, painfully, deliberately. Brick by brick I was building something even if no one else saw it yet. What mattered was that I did, and Liana did. And someday I knew someone else would too, someone who could change the course of everything. By my second year, I'd started to make small ripples in the crowded pool of Stanford's finance program. I won a departmental award for a portfolio forecasting model I designed in my spare time. I published a short market analysis in an undergraduate economics journal, a piece dissecting volatility triggers in decentralized assets that even Professor Bell had taken an interest in. She pulled me aside after class one day and said, "There's clarity in your work. That's rare." Coming from her, it felt like a trophy. I sent Selma a scanned copy of the article. She called that night and left a voicemail, just her saying, "Told you. Quiet value, loud results before hanging up." That was her way. Liana brought me coffee that day, grinning as she slid it across the library table. "You know, some of us dream of a single publication. You're out here rewriting how students think about market risk. I'm rewriting it for extra credit," I said, trying to joke, but she just looked at me the way she always did, like I was more than even I knew. Then a message from home. Subject line, "Quick favor." No greeting, no congratulations. Just, "If Camden struggles this semester, help him however you can. Remind him of deadlines. Maybe proofread. He's under a lot of pressure." No mention of my award, no acknowledgement that I had anything of my own going on. I stared at it for a while, my fingers twitching above the keyboard. Then I deleted it without replying. My chest stayed tight for hours after the words burning even in their absence. But I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. Because while my parents seemed determined to look through me, others were finally seeing me for who I was becoming. And someone soon was going to give me the chance to show them all just how far that could go. Professor Bell never raised her voice, but she had a way of making silence feel like pressure. In her risk management seminar, she once spent 20 minutes dissecting a single paragraph of a case study while the rest of us held our breath. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to answer, it was to ask the one question we hadn't dared to. After class, she called me over and gestured to my final paper. "Your thinking's clean," she said, "but you're holding back." "Why?" I shrugged. "I'm just trying to get it right." She studied me for a long moment. "Right doesn't change anything. Bold does." That week, she told me about the FinTech Innovation Challenge. It was hosted annually by a private network of tech firms and venture capitalists. Students pitched disruptive ideas in financial technology. The winner got a $10,000 prize and, more importantly, the attention of companies that mattered. "You've got a mind for systems," she said. "Use it." I hesitated. It wasn't fear of losing, it was fear of being noticed, then dismissed. Again. But Liana didn't let me back out. "You have an idea," she said one night, sitting cross-legged on my floor, surrounded by index cards and late-night coffee. "Make them listen." So I pitched a platform for decentralized investing, one that pooled micro-capital from small investors and used AI-driven risk models to offer real-time insights. A system that didn't just serve the elite, but made the market more democratic. We worked on the presentation like it was a second job. Liana helped me refine the language trim, the fluff, build a narrative. Professor Bell drilled me on technical details. The night before the finals, I practiced my pitch under a flickering desk lamp, whispering it until the sun came up. I won. $10,000, a standing ovation, and an internship offer from Verity Tech, the rising fintech powerhouse my father had once described with a sneer as reckless disruptors. But they saw something in me Langston Capital never did. And for the first time I didn't care if my parents would ever understand what that meant. Because I finally did. The sun was sharp that morning, slicing across the Stanford quad as rows of black gowns settled into their chairs. I sat among them, my speech folded in my pocket, fingers clenched, breath steady. My parents didn't know I was speaking. They didn't know I had been named valedictorian. They showed up anyway. I saw them 3 rows back, my father unreadable. My mother rehearsed Camden, glancing around as if this whole thing bored him. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. In the front row, Liana gave me a small nod. Selma adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and smiled like she already knew how it would end. When the dean called my name, I stepped up. The podium was warm from the sun. The applause faded quickly. I arrived at Stanford with a backpack full of second-hand books, a partial scholarship, and a list of night shifts, I said. I wasn't funded, I wasn't supported. I was told I'd figure it out, that it would build character. I scanned the crowd, but never let my gaze settle on them. So I figured it out. While others slept, I worked. While others celebrated, I saved. This degree isn't just proof of education, it's proof that quiet effort builds louder futures. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The courtyard filled with applause before I even finished. Liana stood. Selma wiped at her eyes. And 3 rows back, my father looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. My mother reached for Camden's hand. He couldn't meet my eyes. I stepped down into something that finally felt like mine. It came 3 days after graduation. I was packing up my room when my phone buzzed with a number I still hadn't blocked. I let it ring twice before answering. "Everett," my father said. His voice was lower than usual, without its usual certainty. "I wanted to speak with you." There was a long pause. I waited. "The firm's facing some headwinds," he finally said. "We're restructuring. There's a need for sharper analysis. We thought you might consider a role. Analytics department. It's where most people start." It wasn't framed as an apology. Just business. Clean, simple as if the past had been a misunderstanding we could file away and forget. I sat down on the edge of my mattress, fingers tight around the phone. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've already accepted something else. Silence. Where Verity Tech? The pause stretched. Well, he said slowly, that's unexpected. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I kept my voice steady. I've built something of my own. That's enough for me. I didn't ask how the company was doing. I didn't ask about Camden. I let him sit with the reality that the son he overlooked had become the man he now needed, and that I didn't need anything back. He didn't say goodbye, just ended the call. And that was the last time I heard my father's voice until the name Langston Capital appeared in the acquisition files on my desk. We were sitting on a bench overlooking the bay, the wind soft and cool against our backs. I had just accepted the Verity Tech offer, the contract signed and filed, when Liana turned to me with a look I didn't quite recognize, part nervous, part proud. There's something I should tell you, she said. And I probably should have told you earlier. I waited. Professor Bell is my godmother, and I'm on Verity Tech's board, technically. My family has a stake. I didn't want you to find out from someone else. The air shifted. My pulse stumbled. For how long, I asked. Since before the pitch competition. She mentioned you to me, but I already knew who you were, and you didn't tell me. She nodded slowly. Because I needed you to believe it was yours. Not because of me, not because of her, because you earned it. And you did. For a moment I didn't know what to say. I thought of all the nights I'd doubted myself, the moments I clung to scraps of confidence just to keep moving forward. Was this support in disguise or a safety net I hadn't asked for? But when I looked at her, I didn't see deception. I saw every study session, every midnight coffee, every time she'd told me I was more than what they saw. I reached for her hand. Thank you, I said. She smiled, eyes glinting in the sunlight, and just like that, the ground beneath me didn't feel so lonely anymore. We married in early spring under the wide skies of Selma's vineyard. The ceremony was small, just a scattering of friends, a few colleagues, and Selma at the front in her signature red scarf holding a wine glass instead of a bouquet. Liana wore a pale blue dress the color of calm before rain, and I stood beside her with a heart that no longer felt hollow. We wrote our vows on paper torn from old notebooks. They weren't perfect, but they were true. After we kissed and the music started, Selma raised her glass. Some roots, she said, her voice carrying across the rows of vines, grow deep enough to crack stone. The toast was short, but it stayed with me longer than most words ever had. A week later, Verity Tech passed Langston Capital in market value. I saw the headline, stared at it for a full minute, and then closed the browser. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like something old had finally been washed away. I turned my energy toward something better, developing accessible financial tools for communities that had been ignored by the systems I once thought I had to conquer. My name no longer had to echo in anyone's ears to feel real. I never called my parents. They had become a part of the background, distant, blurred, irrelevant to what I'd built. And as I stood beside Liana that night beneath the lights, strung between the vines, I finally understood that I had stopped chasing their silence long ago.